evening. My name is Wallace Gator Bradley, and I'm the host of the Bradley Report. I'm also the president and urban translator of United in Peace, Inc. This show is being presented by United in Peace, Inc., and it was produced by none other than the chairman of United in Peace, Inc., that's Terry Marsh Bradley, and I'm so blessed that she's my wife. Got a very interesting show because, as you know, March 19th is an election. And I got two issues that I want to share with my viewing audience. Based off the fact it makes no difference who you want to vote for, just come out and vote. We got a Supreme Court race that's happening, okay? And it seems like race is the issue. But in the name of equitable justice for all, it may not be the issue. It's about who's the most qualified. And something else, everybody talk about the migrants and everybody say what has to be done for the homeless. Know this, it ain't up to the elected officials. It's up to you to make the decision by coming out and voting yes. They had it all on the news that the judge said that it was knocked off the ballot. Come to find out it's still on the ballot. So however way you vote on that, be it yes or no, come out and vote. So without further ado.
Okay, viven aquí en el condado de Cook.
Illinois Appellate Court Justice Jesse Reyes hopes to make history on primary day by becoming the first Latino to serve on the Illinois Supreme Court.
If you can't see yourself or your community can't see itself on the Supreme Court, then you're talking about generations that'll be deterred from ever even wanting to try it.
Reyes faces Justice Joy Cunningham. Backed by the Cook County Democratic Party, Cunningham was selected by former Chief Justice Ann Burke to replace her on Illinois' High Court when Burke retired. Cunningham chose not to be interviewed for this report. However, during her 2022 swearing-in ceremony, she said maintaining judicial independence is a more important judicial principle than gender, race, or ethnicity.
To me, it's the bedrock of democracy because you have to make decisions based on the rule of law, what's fair and not what's popular, or because you're worried about your political future.
Releasing her first TV ad last week, Cunningham has raised almost twice as much money as Reyes, but he says his campaign is gaining steam. Besides the need for Latino representation, Reyes says he has more judicial experience than his opponent, including 26 years on the bench, 11 of it on the appellate court.
So I got to do, felonies, I got to do misdemeanors, the civil cases, I was in domestic violence court.
Reyes says his experience on the bench also includes foreclosures during the height of the housing crisis. He says throughout his career, he has created programs to help with equity and language barriers.
I have been proactive in terms of trying to create access to justice.
Because the Illinois Supreme Court race does not have a Republican in it, the March 19th primary will decide who wins between Joy Cunningham and Jesse Reyes.
I know Jesse Reyes and I know Joy. The last time it was a race where Joy Cunningham ran for Supreme Court Justice, I was her urban translator and political consultant. She didn't win. Okay, and this time I'm with Jesse Reyes, but you can pick whoever you want to pick. I know Jesse Reyes, your friend. I helped his campaign from him becoming an appellate court judge. And he made a promise, and I made a promise if you decide that you're going to run for Supreme Court judge, because I feel like I would have to have a Latina on the bench. But here's something that I want to share with you for you to see and make your decision. And I want you to pay attention to this form I'm about to show you.
Good Sunday morning and welcome to WGN-TV Political Report. I'm Paul Listening. Illinois' primary election day is just under 2 months away, and we want to take you inside the top races you need to know about. Now, there are no statewide positions on Illinois' ballots this year. Voters in Cook County will pick a new Supreme Court justice that could impact the state for the next decade. Joy Cunningham was picked to fill a vacancy on the Illinois Supreme Court at the end of 2022. Now looking for a more permanent position, she's facing a challenge from fellow Democrat Jesse Reyes in the March 19th primary. Now, there's no Republican running for the seat, so whoever wins this contest will be awarded a full 10-year term on the state's high court. I hosted both candidates at a forum at the Union League Club of Chicago on Thursday. Let's share it with you. Most justices and lawyers know who you are, but the general public does not. So that the average voter does not skip this race on the ballot or just vote based on some demographic conclusion they draw about gender or race based on your name. Tell people why this race, with all judicial elections, so it's not just this race, all judicial elections matter, and what people need to know about you to determine that you are the right person for this job. We'll start with Justice Cunningham.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and I'd like to thank, first of all, the Chicago Bar Association, the Union League Club, and of course you, Paul, for hosting this forum. I think it's very important that the population, the populace at large, understand who is serving on their Supreme Court. State Supreme Courts have become much more important than they ever were at any time in our history because of what's happening on the federal level. Many of the issues that used to be determined by the federal courts are now being turfed back to the state Supreme Court. Issues such as reproductive rights, voting rights, the right of labor to organize, all of those things that ordinary people care about are being turfed to the states. So who sits on your state Supreme Court is also more important than ever in our history. I bring to the table the fact that I am already on the Illinois Supreme Court. When Justice Burke retired, the Illinois Supreme Court looked at all 24 appellate court justices, and they selected me because of my breadth and depth of experience. I have served at all levels of the court system. I bring corporate experience. I bring private sector experience. I've been an assistant attorney general. I'm a member of the prestigious American Law Institute. That is the body on which courts rely when they're looking to interpret the law. And I have a wealth of experience that I think is very important to the people of Illinois, and that's why the Supreme Court selected me. So if I had to say in a capsule, I am the best candidate because I'm already doing the job and doing it well. I've earned high marks from my colleagues as well as from the bar associations. And I think consistency is extremely important, especially in this time in our history.
Thank you. Justice Reyes.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for moderating. I want to thank the Union League Club and also the Chicago Bar Association and its president for co-sponsoring this important forum. I've always been a firm believer that I think it's important for the public to be aware of who their judges are and how they're being selected. So I appreciate this opportunity to address the public. So I have been an individual that's always been out in the community. I believe that it's important to be out in the community because one of the things that you realize is some of the issues that apparently sometimes we don't face in the courts, but that people deal on a daily basis. And that also helps you to have a part of empathy for what people are going through in their various communities. So that's one of the things that I bring. I bring an empathy, not only because of my humble beginnings and my background and coming from a blue-collar neighborhood and a blue-collar family, but because I'm out there with the people and I hear what they have to say. And I think that's what's important, because sometimes we miss that on the courts of review. We miss that at the trial court levels unless they come in front of us. So that's one of the things that I think is very important. And as was mentioned during the introduction, I have come very highly qualified and highly recommended by the bar associations. I've written extensively, not only locally but nationally, on a variety of different topics of the law. I've also lectured throughout this country and internationally on various issues, constitutional law and other issues, which I think are important for the viewers to realize and to see that I'm not only just locally, but I am internationally respected in terms of being a speaker and a expert in some areas of the law. But more importantly, what I bring is a aggressive, progressive attitude to trying to make access to justice available for everybody. And I think that's one of the things that's very very important. Is, the Supreme Court has done a good job in terms of developing commissions and committees to look at access to justice, but I think we could do better. We could always do better, and that's what I want to do. I want to do better. I want to provide an opportunity for everybody to have access to justice in our court system.
Cook County Democratic leaders have overwhelmingly endorsed Justice Cunningham. Latino leaders are pushing for Justice Reyes. Now, demographically, the county's Latino population is on the rise, African-American population on the decline, and there is a tension, I think, between those groups going forward. And so, what do you have to say about the issue of race that seemingly has been injected into this process and this selection? Justice Cunningham.
I'm glad you asked that question, because I think that race has been injected into this process, and it shouldn't have been. But I would like to quickly point out that I have widespread support among many racial groups, including in the Latino community. I just received the overwhelming support of the independent precinct organization of the 22nd Ward, which is a Latino organization, and it is chaired by the head of the Latino caucus, and they have endorsed me. I am very, very much the people's Supreme Court justice. While I think it's very interesting and distracting to inject race into the race, no pun intended, I think it's really important to look at the credentials, to look at the experience, and when there's an opportunity to do so, talk to people and tell them why race should be set aside in terms of this race. As I said before, state Supreme Courts have become more important than ever, and Illinois in particular is such a state, such a court, because of where we're located. I bring the depth and breadth of experience to this court that's needed right now more so than my race. So I think injecting race is a red herring. I have widespread support among many racial and ethnic groups, and I think that that's what the voters should absolutely look at, and not my race.
Thank you. Justice Reyes.
Sure. So I don't know if it's so much race. I think what it is about a voice, diversity, and inclusion. I think what it's about is giving a community an opportunity to be heard. What I think it boils down to is to look at where we currently are at in terms of populations and society values, and make sure that those values and those social norms are part of the conversation when decisions are made. Sandra Day O'Connor, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor mentioned that when she sat with Justice Thurgood Marshall, she would always wait when the issue of race came up to see what his suggestion and his input was on a particular case. Just think if he wasn't there. Just think if he wasn't part of that discussion in that chambers. And that's what I think this is all about, is providing a voice to be provided to the justices when they make determinations on issues that are going to affect all of us in the state of Illinois. And the other question about diversity and inclusion is, we have no Asians, we have no Muslims on the bench. We haven't had a Jewish person on the bench since Justice Seymour Simon, who was the great dissenter. And so we're losing all of that by not focusing on the question of what is it that it's missing on the court, what does the court need, and what opportunities are there to provide that. And I think in this race, we have the opportunity to add diversity further on the Illinois Supreme Court.
The Illinois legislature has been certainly consistent in expanding abortion rights for women over the last few terms, certainly since the Dobbs case, and of course the Supreme Court dealing with it as well. But my question for you is, what kind of guidelines would you recognize as ones that are useful for the legislature to follow as they think about an additional expansion of rights, which seems to be the direction things go, knowing it could face you? Do you have any suggestions you would make to the legislature, things they should consider?
Well, as I said earlier, Illinois is an oasis in a desert of red states. So we've become like the lighthouse for women who are seeking reproductive and to enforce their reproductive rights from neighboring states and even states that are much further away. But as an Illinois Supreme Court justice, One of the things that I've done recently, and my current colleagues, and this has nothing to do with specifically the question that you asked, but I'll tie it up. Establishing a really good relationship with the legislative leaders is really important because we get to understand from them what they're looking at, what they're planning to do, and they get to understand from us what are the parameters of what we can do as justices. And this is kind of a new activity in the Supreme Court where we have dinner with the legislative leaders and talk about these very issues. And I think it's very important. I feel very privileged to be a part of that, but that's one of the things that we are doing. We are preempting having problems come up to the court that we may have to say this is not constitutional by having discussions. And this was a program that was started under Chief Justice Ann Burke, and it's working very well. So that's what I would do.
Justice Reyes?
Well, it depends on the circumstance, but I think one way of effectively maybe communicating to the legislature is to decisions. You know, that's one way of communicating with them and letting them know what what the court's considerations are, what the court's concerns are, and to make sure that the legislature is aware of where the court is on these particular issues. I think is very important. Also, as they say, the bully pulpit. You know, going out and speaking at events. You can't speak particularly directly to issues, but you could kind of address certain things that are happening in society. And I think that's a very important mechanism also, because you're not only talking to the legislators, but you're talking to the people who vote and elect the legislators. And I think that's another important means of communicating to the legislators other than doing it directly. I think there's certain issues that you can directly speak to the legislators about, but something that may end up coming in front of you that you might have to decide on, I would feel a little, not directly to speak on that. I think there's other ways of doing it, and I think one of the most efficient ways is doing it through the public, through decisions, whether they be published decisions or not. Everybody reads them anyway. They're on the website, right? And then also through communications from the court.
And we extend our thanks to the candidates and the Union League Club of Chicago. You can actually check more from the forum on our website, and we're going to take a quick break right now. But next up on WGN,
You know, the wonderful thing
Council set to meet for the
about this, it shows you can see exactly what he's saying. When he made mention about the fact that there was no Muslim or no Asian, and there hasn't been a Jew on the Supreme Court bench for a while, and he wanted to speak about the voice, not just for the Latinos. I know what he's saying. I remember Judge Pincham had me in a room with a bunch of committeemen, Democratic committeemen, and Alderman Burke told Judge Hyman, he's appellate court judge now, Justice Hyman, that they could appoint someone Jewish, but it would be hard for them to get elected countywide. And Pincham said, Gator, close the door behind you. And I was about to walk out the room. He said, no, stay in the room, close the door behind you. So I stayed in the room, and he said, what did you think about what you just heard? I said, I thought that was wrong, but I think the black committeemen need to get with the Jewish committeemen so that they can come with the weighted vote and get Mr. Hyman, then Mr. Hyman, on the ballot. He got on the ballot, and they made an issue because he hired me as his consultant, as his urban translator. And they came, former gang leader and all this, even though I have a partner, even though I helped everybody else get elected. I want to say that to say this. We end up beating the candidate that was against him, which was a former assistant state's attorney. We beat him by 60,000 votes. So I understand what Justice Rios is saying. There's 3 African Americans that's on the Supreme Court. 2 of them are African American women. One is an African American man. One is a Republican Supreme Court justice. The other 2 is a Democrat. So in all fairness, but it's up to you voters. If you feel it's time for inclusiveness to be on that bench, then elect Jesse Rios. If you feel there's no time for that, it's not his term, then elect Joy Cunningham. But come out and vote. There's another issue that's very important before I get ready to go off the air.
Karen, this is a significant political blow for the mayor, who has wholeheartedly supported the Bring Chicago Home measure. But even as the city continues to explore its legal options, some say it may be best to go back to the drawing board and try again next time. Early voters heading to the polls at the Loop Super site might be experiencing some confusion today, with a key referendum question still on the March 19 ballot, even after a Cook County judge yesterday declared it illegal.
Unless there's a successful appeal of this decision, if you vote for this referendum, it is not going to be valid.
While the written decision will not come until Monday, ultimately the judge agreed with a coalition of real estate and development groups that sued, ruling that the Bring Chicago Home measure was invalid because of how the referendum question was drafted, posing 3 separate questions rather than 1, and using a practice called log rolling, where voters are offered one thing in exchange for another. In this case, if approved, the measure, aimed at raising money for the city's unhoused, would have raised the transfer tax from its current flat rate of 0.75% to 2% for properties over $1 million and 3% for properties over $1.5 million. It also would have reduced rates for the sale of lower valued properties.
Yes, they can appeal, but they could also go back to the drawing board and restructure the referendum and bring it back to the voters in November.
But with more than 1,000 votes already cast and the question still appearing on the ballots now, what are voters to think or do? A spokesperson for the Chicago Board of Elections today said any previous votes for the referendum are sequestered and will not be counted at this time. This is subject to change by future court order. Supporters of the referendum are not giving up.
The referendum is still on the ballot. No one should stop voting in favor of the referendum.
A spokesperson for the Chicago Board of Elections also saying that they're waiting on the judge's written order, which will be entered on Monday, before determining how to proceed, both from an appeal standpoint and with the early voting process in general, which might have to be paused again if the judge orders the question removed from the ballot altogether.
The wonderful thing about all this, regardless of the commercials that's telling the lies, and including when the Tribune put it out there that it was knocked off the ballot, I'm saying go vote. You can still vote because it's on the ballot. Vote, yes, if you really care about affordable housing and the homeless, just vote. I voted early, like I normally do. So I'm asking you to vote, don't choke. To God be the glory. That's Gator's story.